How are you all? I hope you're all keeping very, very well out there in the world of art and painting. I have a lovely little tutorial for you this week. This is a commission for someone. They sent me a photograph which they took themselves, and I think it's fantastic. Let me show you. Lovely autumn kind of a scene. What do we think about that? Beautiful, rich kind of dark, deep reds and browns on the ground. And this photograph was taken very close, so it was basically down on the ground looking up. And there's someone way off in the distance standing with a dog. And this person asked me to paint this as a commission. So I thought, why not use this as a tutorial? I think it make a beautiful picture. I really do. Colours are wonderful in this. So I'm using a 16 by 12 canvas. That's what I want. I'll get my colours on the palette there now in just a moment, and follow me and see what you think. I will try and simplify this, but there's going to be a lot of lovely knife work at the end of the painting with those leaves on the ground. Lots of thick, chunky bits of paint, and we'll, scratch them along the floor to make lots of kind of thick paint and texture on the canvas. So I think it's going to turn out really well. And let's kind of put our own stamp on it, but we're keeping it kind of pretty much almost exactly of the photograph, so to speak. So let's see what we can do with this. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be right back. Do not go anywhere. All right, everyone, here we go. This is the canvas. I have one quick reference line here, just across. There's a reference photograph. Now, isn't that gorgeous? Just lovely colours. We'll simplify it, but lots of work to do on trees. Let's crack on. I'll show you what colours I have. Titanium white, Naples yellow, cadmium yellow pale, burnt sienna, cadmium red, burnt umber, magenta, phthalo blue and black. I have some turpentine with a little linseed oil in there. I have a canvas which I primed once, and I just gave this a very, very light coat of linseed oil, just like this, okay? Very, very lightly. You can use a bit of liquid clear if you like as well. That's absolutely fine. Or you can just use artist turpentine as well. That just stops the canvas from kind of soaking the paint in very quickly. So we'll have plenty of time to soften colours and blend. So let's go and try it. Come on. This will be exciting. I'm going to just start with a very light sky up in the background, a kind of a very, very whitey sort of a blue, okay? Let's just take a damp brush, some titanium white, tiny touch of blue, phthalo blue. Now, you will have to kind of thin this out slightly with some thinners, but I have a lot of white in here. It's very thick, look, very thick. And the idea of the linseed oil on the canvas is when I put this very thick paint on, it'll kind of sort of thin very slightly. You see, the linseed oil will kind of thin that out very, very slightly. And it just spreads lovely on the canvas. Now, if this was a very dry canvas and I was putting on very thick paint, it would just be a nightmare. It would drag the paint off and it wouldn't go very far. So that's why I like to use just a little linseed oil in there. I think makes all the difference. Now, you might not be able to see this. It's very white. You could probably see a very slight shade of a very, very light blue in there. Now I'm just going to go a little bit stronger. I just want to add a touch of colour into this. Now I'm not going everywhere, look, I'm just going a little bit here and there. A little bit of thick whitey kind of a blue colour, because it's just popping through the trees here and there. Not too much of it, but just a little. And it's really just to add a hint of colour into the background. That's all I want to do. And a little bit over here. That's pretty much all I need to do. Just a very, very light shade. There's no point in blending this or anything because I'll have trees covering a lot of this. Now we're into the very background tree colour. So when I paint a scene like this, a forest scene we'll say, I always start with the very distant colours and I come forward. So looking at the photograph, I'm going to go for a very light, soft green. I'm going to take a touch of phthalo blue, some white, tiny touch of thinners just on the corner of the brush there, tiny, tiny touch. And I'll take a touch of Naples yellow. Naples yellow and blue gives you this beautiful, soft, distant kind of a green. See that colour? It's a very, very soft colour. It's lovely. It's just wonderful. And I'm putting a thin coat of this on. sort of around the centre here, okay? Just to suggest very distant trees. I go up here as well, just mix a bit more of that. Naples yellow, little phthalo blue, touch of white, and you can change the strength of the hue, you see? I've gone a little bit stronger with that. I just want to kind of suggest very distant background colours. And if anything else, this is probably just a kind of an undercoat, an underpainting, let's say, of just some green softening up into the blue. All right, so you can begin to already see it coming out, can't you? It's kind of it's starting to come forward a little bit with these stronger greens. I'm going to do the same over here, and I'm kind of just coming down at an angle, softening up into the sky. Everything is nice and soft, and the point is to keep this nice light source in the centre of the painting. That's going to be a focal point later on. Now, I'm going a little bit stronger, just a bit more blue. I'm going to just scrape that across my canvas like so. Again, I'm using a very kind of a dry brush for all of this. So I'm just scraping it across, round in circles, just allowing the texture to stay there. Now, I am going to start warming colours. I'm going to start going warmer with my greens. So I'm going to start with phthalo blue and then cadmium yellow pale. Now that does give you a very cold kind of a green, doesn't it? I agree, it's a bit of a cold green. But if we take a touch of burnt sienna into that and just play around with that, we get some warm greens. So a little touch of burnt sienna makes all the difference. You see what I mean? So we've nice warm greens here. Again, this again is going to soften into that softer, cool colour and just create different shades of colour. Typically with oil painting, normally I would go from a very dark to a very light, but for this I want to create that distance, so I'm going from a light to a dark. Now that's absolutely acceptable in oils, okay? You can do whatever you like, whichever makes you feel comfortable. But I don't want to go from dark to light too soon, because sometimes when you go from dark to light in painting, you think, I put on my darks now and then I put on my highlights later. When that happens, sometimes you go too dark and it's very difficult to lighten the colour again afterwards. So that's why I'm just tending to be a little bit careful. I'm going to very gently soften some foliage into the background over there. And I'm just using my rough brush on edge, and I'm just kind of coming up like this and just very gently tapping my big flat brush here and there, just to create the illusion that there's all this foliage off in the distance and it's kind of disappearing away into that light colour, barely touching the canvas. As it comes down, then I'm getting much more stronger with my brush strokes. Look, really kind of put that in. And again, I'm going to soften away up here. It's just to give the impression that there's lots of foliage way off in the distance. It's a forest scene, so there's going to be basically foliage everywhere anyway. But I'm starting with this kind of lighter shade. I don't want to go too dark too quickly, if you understand what I mean. And a lot of this as well is sort of trial by error, you know. You try something, if it works, you keep going. If it doesn't work, then you kind of change to something else. And that's what I find with painting, and that's what I like about painting. You try something, okay, maybe it doesn't work, it's the wrong shade or something, then you try something else. It's all about discovering what works. Now I'm going to start going slightly deeper with my greens. And what I mean is, I'm going to take some burnt umber and phthalo blue. There's a bit more blue in this, and I just want to go kind of very deep, a very deep shade down here in the bottom. And I'll show you what else I'm going to do then in just a moment. Let me just come along here and just kind of fill this in with this deeper shade, softening it together slightly, you see, just softening it in. So you can see we're kind of bringing our shades closer to us. But what I want to do now is I want to make a kind of a deep purple, okay? I'll show you why. If I take some phthalo blue with some magenta, mixing it into that green, you'll notice it's the soft kind of soft mauvey shade. And what that does, putting the soft mauvey shade into these trees, it creates depth in the shadows and it creates distance. You see already how much depth that has created. It really gives you that feeling of distance and the warmth as well at the same time. It just draws you in, and it's very complementary with the green. So you can see, you can kind of see now how that's almost, you know, it gives it a bit of depth, doesn't it? So when I'm painting trees like this, I always tend to add a touch of a mauvey shade into the green. I just find it does something for the painting, it really does. It just adds that lovely depth into your shadowed areas. Now I'm doing all this with a dry brush. I'm not wetting my brush anymore. This is already wet, so I'm not putting any more turpentine on my brush. I'm just painting wet onto wet. I'm taking some black, some cadmium yellow, and a little touch of blue. So I'm kind of going for the warmer shades of green this time. So black and yellow will give you that lovely warm shade of green. And I'm just going to pop some of that in there. So now I'm building up my slightly darker layers, which I'm then going to highlight with some nice rich yellowy greens. And it's just a case of going around like this and adding some of that nice yellow with a little black, and just go along. And you can see now what's happening. This richer colour, this more vibrant sort of green, is now pushing those cool colours back into the distance, isn't it? I'm going to soften it down. Then I'm going to go off to the other side. I'll do the same on the other side. Let's just pop a little bit of that darker shade up there. Again, picking up some of the yellow, warming it slightly. This is very, very random now. I'm not kind of focusing on getting particular clumps of foliage and shape. I'm just focusing on giving the impression of lots of foliage up on the treetops. Just lots of leaves and all that kind of stuff. Look, it's just everywhere. So just with that very rough brush, okay, simple flat brush, but it's very kind of opened out. I'm just dabbing, dabbing, dabbing. Let's get a bit more. Let's take a bit of burnt sienna in the mix. That'll warm it again a little bit more. And softening down into this kind of purpley mauve as well, going in front of that. Now all the while I'm doing this, I'm thinking, look, I'm just giving this, and it's an impression of the scene. I'm not trying to copy the scene exactly, okay? The customer just wants a nice impression of the photograph and capturing the feeling of that kind of low photograph looking out into the forest. That's what the customer wants. It's just that feeling. So I'm not going to try and copy this like for like, not too much. But I will try and kind of, you know, so when the customer looks at it, yes, it looks like the photograph, yes, you know, that type of thing. I'm not trying to paint a photograph. I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to start putting in some tree trunks off in the distance. Let's take a small pointy brush, wet that, and I'm going to go for a very kind of a dark blacky green. A little bit of cadmium yellow, a little bit of black, and maybe the tiniest touch of blue. So I'm just going to use that now, very, very wet, and I'm going to go off into the distance, and I'm going to just sort of, you know, wiggle a couple of tree trunks up here and there, just in the distance. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of softening them in as well. Because you have to keep remembering that a lot of this will be covered by a thicker foliage later on. So I'm just darting in and out and just popping a few suggestions of some very, very distant tree trunks popping up. It's a very random sort of a scene. There's just lots of tree trunks everywhere, basically. So I'm just going to try and get the feeling quite kind of loosely. I'm going to go a little bit darker and a bit richer. Some black, maybe a bit of burnt umber. And I might even have to switch to a slightly larger brush. I think I'll go for a small flat brush. Look, let's try this small flat brush. See if this makes any difference. Now, burnt umber, bit of black, a little touch of blue. A little bit thicker. And we're just going to pop some of these thicker tree trunks in as well. There's kind of quite a big one coming up here, isn't there? So you can see the way I'm only just kind of going for an impression. I'm literally just looking at the direction of the tree trunks. I'm not kind of focused too much on making all the angles exactly the same and all that kind of thing. I just tend to look at where there's a clump of big thick tree trunks. I just put them in where I see them. Okay? That's generally how I tend to work. And for me, you know, it's all about simplifying. I know there's a lot of artists out there who would probably spend, 10 hours just painting tree trunks, getting them to look exactly the same. I much rather do just a simple impression of a scene. And look, let's just drag a few through here as well. Doesn't have to be actual paint on the brush. We can just drag a few through the foliage. All the while, we're just giving this lovely impression in the scene. That's it. Now, what I will do is take a bit of blue and a bit of black. And I'm just going to really darken some of these. I just really want to go with a little bit of dark paint on some of them. Just to make them stand out that little bit more. I hope these tutorials are helping you, by the way. I really do. The whole point of my channel is just to help simplify the process of painting. That's all I'm trying to do. Because, if you can help someone with something, if you have the means of helping someone with something, use it. My mother always said to me, before she passed away, use your gift to help others. If you have a knack for explaining things and helping others, just use it, Do something constructive with it. And she's always said to me in the past, take no notice of negative comments, because there's always going to be someone out there who doesn't like what you do. There's always going to be someone who disagrees with your painting, who, I don't know, they look for something negative to say. There's always going to be someone like that out there. You have to, and if you're thinking about starting your own kind of a channel or something, you have to learn to accept the negative comments. Don't take them seriously, okay? Don't take them to heart, because if you take these things to heart, you will never progress. You will never grow your channel. Not to say that my channel is big, it's not big at all, but you will never have the confidence to, show what you're doing if you take all those negative comments to heart. So I welcome all comments, negative, good, whatever. As long as it's constructive criticism, I'm happy to read them, happy to take it on board. Okay, this is one kind of layer of the painting, let's call it. Let's call this a layer. Now I'm going to go on to some much darker greens, okay? Rich, deep greens. So I'm going to start going darker. A little bit of phthalo blue, bit of black, cadmium yellow. That should give us a nice kind of a rich green, a vibrant kind of a green, okay? Plenty of yellow in this now, don't be shy. Let's have a look. And let's just start dabbing this in, softening it around. I'm just being very random now with all of this. More yellow. Okay, I'm just being very random. You can see already. And this is going to be the dark side of all the foliage. I will be putting on highlights on most of this anyway. But this is just to bring the next layer forward. That's all I'm trying to do. And I'm cutting in front of those tree trunks as well. That's going to create more distance in all of those. Let's go up here and just fill this area with this lovely, let's get more cadmium yellow in here. Fill this area up with lovely rich green. And I'm just moving the brush in all different directions. I'm coming across, I want to create this canopy effect over the scene, okay? So I'm going to come across like this and bring it down. You see the way I'm turning my brush, going up and turning. That's creating this sort of, you know, circling everything down in there. I'm going to try some burnt sienna with cadmium yellow, because that does give you the most wonderful warm green as well. A beautiful sort of autumn green. And again, let's cut in front of a lot of this here. So you can see now, the reason I was so loose with my tree trunks is I'm just cutting in front of a lot of it anyway. So that's why I was being very loose with all of that. And in the end, you will only see little bits of this poking through here and there. Let's get some more yellow, a little bit more black. I also get a lot of questions on when painting wet into wet, trying to get your paint to stick. I get a lot of questions about that. It's tricky, I'll be honest. What I would say to you is, what I do is I keep all my back layers very thin, okay? I don't go very thick with the paint. That means your next layers will stick much easier, because if you put on lots of thick paint first and you try and paint over that, it just becomes mushy and messy with oils. So I always say I keep my first layers very thin, if you can. Just keep them nice and thin. That's the trick. Now we need to go much darker with all of this. I'm going to go lots of black, lots of blue, and some yellow. So now we're going right into dark territory, aren't we? Lots of black, lots of blue. And I'm going to start popping this in. And as I get over here, I'm just going to very gently ease it out and just soften it away. Okay? Now, plenty of blue in this, because these deep shadowy areas, they need to look very shadowy. So plenty of blue in that. So I have basically a kind of a blacky blue colour on my brush. But what's happening is that colour then mixes with the greens and it creates lots of these different shades. You see what I mean? So you get lots of lights and darks in your greens. Already, that is coming together nicely, isn't it? And you can see how we're kind of painting over a lot of the tree trunks. Again, that's why I was saying earlier, just do it very loosely, you know. Imagine that your tree trunks are only going to be poking out here and there, because that's what happens. It's only here and there you'll see little bits of these tree trunks. So again, just be very loose. I'm just going to kind of fill all this into a very dark area. And I will then maybe I'm going to try some phthalo blue with some magenta. And I'm going to try that, and I'm going to try softening that up, creating this little area of warmth. Plenty of magenta in here. So that's just creating, again, you can see it's some complementary colours. A little bit of a pinky kind of mauve in there. It complements all the greens, doesn't it? Now, let's do a little bit of that shade over here as well, because when they say about balancing a painting, your composition, balancing your composition, what they mean is have similar colours on either side of your canvas. Because if you think about it, okay, if I have a lot of, say, rich green on one side, and then you come over to the other side, there's lots of green with purple, it's going to look out of shape, out of balance. So when I'm adding these kind of mauve shades to one side like this, I'll always come over to the other side and I'll add some there as well. It just balances your painting, okay? Now I'm going right into phthalo blue and a little black. And I'm going to just deepen this right down here, down in the corner, okay? It needs to be nice and dark, a bit more black even. Just to create very dark sides in the forest. A little bit of black, you can go again in here. Typically in a forest, the colours will always get much darker as they come down towards the ground, won't they? So that's what we'll do. Put plenty of darks in here and there, creating this canopy. Now let's stop and assess and see how we're getting on. It's a good idea to stop every now and then and just take a look at how you're getting on. Now what I want to do is take almost pure black, a thin black, okay? A very, very thin watery black with my flat brush. And I'm just going to again kind of pop in a few thick tree trunks. So now I'm creating the next layer forward, okay? There's a nice one here, kind of comes up and it turns, doesn't it? And just give it a little wiggle. Give it a nice little wiggle. And we'll pop one or two in here. Another one out of the painting there. We'll do the same over here. Let's just bring this kind of deep one back in, because we have a very prominent one there. And then there's just simply a few, again, popping in and out of the canvas over here. Just pop one or two in. Then we'll go on to our fine brush and we'll just do a little bit of detail. I'm using just black for this. We'll just bring a couple of branches and stuff off of these. Let's just, you know, add a little touch of detail in here and there. Just bring a few branches off. It's just to help, you know, add a little touch of detail in. Because I will be putting some lighter foliage over a lot of this. So again, just be loose with all of this. You don't have to try and, you know, get all details and stuff like that. And again, just be very loose with all of this. It's just a suggestion. It's basically, in my mind, this is basically just trying to make the painting look busy. Make the forest look busy, that there's lots of stuff going on, lots of branches and all this kind of stuff going here, there and everywhere. It's just trying to create the illusion of it being a very busy scene. And you can see we already done that with our large brush, adding just lots of foliage everywhere. It already looks like there's a lot going on. And in reality, it only took us maybe 30 minutes to paint all these bits of foliage and everything else. So you can, you know, I would use just a big rough brush for all of this work. Just grab any big brush you have and just start dabbing. You know, what's the worst that can happen? It's only paint. You make a mistake, you just paint over it. So let's just go over here and add a few dark branches here and there. Bring a few down like this. Already that's starting to look quite nice, isn't it? Now I do want to add a little bit of light to some of these. I'm going to use blue and a little bit of white, maybe a touch of cadmium yellow. So a very kind of a bluey, whitey sort of a green hue, okay? I'm just going to sort of add a little bit of that to the sides facing the centre. So I want the illusion that the light is kind of coming through the centre and out this way, and it's radiating towards us, catching some of those lights. I just want to create that effect. And you'll notice, it also separates the tree trunks a little bit more from the background, doesn't it? And I'm only just popping a little bit on here and there. Okay? Now you might not be able to see that very well. It is there. When I photograph this at the end, and I put it up at the very end of the video, you'll see all these little highlights. They'll make a difference. Now that's more than enough, really. That's fine. Okay, let's stop and assess our painting and see where we're going to go next. I'm thinking some highlights. Let's clean this brush. Now the way I clean my brush is, I get a lot of comments on this, okay? I simply dip my brush into turpentine and go straight onto some tissue, okay? So dip it in and come straight on, and you can see all that paint being soaked into the tissue. Do not swirl your brush around in turpentine, because as soon as you swirl that brush in your turpentine, you ruin the turpentine. So just keep dipping and soaking. That's all you have to do. And I don't need it spotless. Once most of the paint is gone, that's all I want, okay? Most of it is out. Let's go on to some bright colours. I need to get some cadmium yellow on my palette. This is kind of turning into a nice tutorial, I think. Let's go right into cadmium yellow and a little touch of Sienna, burnt Sienna, okay? I didn't even use cadmium red actually, that's for the bottom here. Cadmium yellow, cadmium red, nice kind of an autumny yellow. Maybe a touch of white. And again, it's going to mix with the greens already there, all right? Just want to suggest a little bit of highlight on some of the trees here and there. Now that might be a little bit orangey. And we'll take some white, yellow, and maybe a touch of blue. I'm just going to go slightly cooler. If it's a little bit too warm, so to speak, just take a touch of phthalo blue. I'm just popping some highlights over that orangey shade, just to, again, soften it down ever so slightly. You'll notice how the colours kind of tend to get quite sort of dirty after a time. If you find that's happening, give your brush just a slight wipe on some tissue and start again. Phthalo blue, cadmium yellow and white. Let's go here. Let's try this side over here. So add a little bit of that in. The point of this is really just to break up the tree trunks a little. Okay, you can suggest some highlights down here with that. Take a bit more white, and we can just go up at an angle like this and create a bit of a bank. Fan brush would be lovely for this as well. But we'll just create a little bit of a bank over here. I'll do the same along here, just add a couple of hints of highlight. Soften the tree trunks away. And I'm happy enough with that. I think I will stick with that. I might just go over some of these with a bit of a cooler colour. Just take away some of that rich yellow, so a tiny touch of phthalo blue maybe over those, just to soften away some of that richer colour. Just make it a bit more cool. We just cool all of that very slightly. And it's all just kind of mixing together now, but that's fine. That's all right. Let's just concentrate on creating the idea of lots of foliage here and there. Be careful not to overdo this because it will get messy. I'm just going to very lightly do this. And I'm going to stop at that. As far as I'm concerned now, my wooded area is pretty much finished. All right? Pretty much finished. And we are 34 minutes in. So look, what I'm going to do, call this part 1 finished. We'll come back in part 2 and we'll do all this lovely work here with the palette knife and all of that. Get lovely thick paint on. Rich browny reds to complement the greens. And let's see how it looks in the end, okay, my friends? I'll be right back with part 2. Do not go anywhere. Thank you for joining me.